In the remote hills of Jiangxi, the battered remnants of the Chinese Communist Party regrouped. Mao and his comrades were now outlaws with a price on their heads. They seized land and started to build a military base. By the late 1920s, they were attracting a steady stream of supporters. Mao was in his element. He loved the ceaseless movement, the danger and the excitement. But he knew it wouldn't be long before Chiang Kai-shek's government attacked.
Mao and other communists realized they had to build an army. And gradually, and with great difficulty, peasants don't actually want to be guerrilla warriors. They want to just till their crops. They've got families to look after. And Mao found it very difficult to build up a guerrilla army. But gradually, in various base areas, they did build up such an army, and it became a threat.
Mao was learning to become a skillful and ruthless organizer, though he hid it behind a facade of great charm.
Mao exuded a kind of basic simplicity. He wore very simple clothes. His clothes were full of cigarette burns. He scratched himself in public. He would do all kinds of, he would commit what might be called charming vulgarities, which made people feel very comfortable, sometimes even superior to him.
The communists became a threat the government could not ignore. And in 1930, Chiang Kai-shek attacked. The communists were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. If they relied on conventional military tactics, they'd be wiped out. It was now that Mao wrote his famous guide to guerrilla warfare. Never take the enemy head-on. Retreat when he advances, attack when he rests. One of the early victims was Mao's wife and companion, Yang Kai-hui, who was killed in a guerrilla raid. 6 months later, as government troops closed in, Mao married again. His new wife was a guerrilla fighter called Ho Tse-chen. But it was a marriage lived on the run. By 1934, there were close to 1 million government soldiers surrounding the communist camp. Even guerrilla warfare became impossible. The communists faced decimation and were forced to withdraw. As they did so, they argued about what to do next. Most of the leaders wanted to make a heroic last stand. Mao, almost alone, counseled against it, and after weeks of retreat, punctuated by military defeats, he forced a showdown.
He chose just the right moment when people were really fed up. They'd march hundreds and hundreds of miles, and they didn't know where they were going, and he seized that opportunity to force a confrontation at which he was able to take over leadership.
It was a historic confrontation, the moment Mao became the unquestioned leader. He set out from Jiangxi in the south on the greatest strategic retreat in military history, a 6,000-mile trek across China to Shaanxi in the north. It became known as the Long March. The communist soldiers were attacked all along the route and paid an appalling price. Of the 100,000 people who set out, less than 20,000 survived. Yet the Long March saved the communists from almost certain extinction and turned Mao into a living legend.
At school, we learned how Mao and the Red Army climbed snowy mountains and waded across vast swamps. They were very heroic. They sacrificed their lives for China and for the liberation of the Chinese people. I worshipped them, of course.
A year later, in 1936, the beleaguered communists straggled into the isolated northern city of Yan'an, too remote for the government forces to reach them. Then as now, Yan'an is an impoverished market town, surrounded by steep mountains and forgotten by successive governments. Mao and the other communist leaders settled into the cave houses typical of the region. As word spread that he had established a new base, fresh supporters trickled in, attracted by his reputation as an outlaw.
Mao could reach out to people, both individually and collectively. He was a great storyteller, for example. He also had a capacity for selecting the place where he would tell the story, so that in Yan'an especially, it was outside. There were caves behind him where people lived. The caves themselves had a certain primitiveness, which implied starting the world all over again. The sound of horses, the clank of military gear, the shouting of soldiers in the distance. So that especially for young people just arriving in Yan'an, there was a kind of magic.
Yan'an became a communist liberated zone, and for the first time in years, Mao had the opportunity to reflect on what he'd learned. He wrote poetry and thought more carefully about revolutionary politics.
I was very taken by him. From his speeches, I feel that he was better than the other Chinese leaders. Some of the others were trained in France or in the USSR, so their intellectual level was different, and we couldn't easily understand them. Most of us prefer Mao.
Mao exploited his popularity. Behind the facade of the great leader, he was also a womanizer.
Mao was very famous for both demanding rigid discipline on the part of his officers and his cadres with respect to women and women's rights, while himself literally plundering the situation. He was a famous philanderer.
As new recruits arrived, Mao started an affair with one of them, an actress called Jiang Qing. He now deserted his wife for her. A year later, he married for the fourth time. He would remain with Jiang Qing for the rest of his life, though he would never be faithful to her either. Only later would it become clear Mao's callousness was part of his personality. At the time, it was excused by the pressures of war. By the late 1930s, Chiang Kai-shek's forces had moved up from the south and were once again on the point of launching a major attack. Help came from an unexpected quarter. China's old enemy, Japan, invaded, committing appalling atrocities against the civilian population. Mao seized the opportunity to forge an unlikely alliance with Chiang Kai-shek in the name of repelling the foreign invader. It came just in time.
The Japanese invasion allowed Mao, honorably, and with much popular support, in effect to force Chiang Kai-shek to desist from his attacks on the communists and to form an anti-Japanese alliance.
3 years later, China and Japan were sucked into World War II. America sent aid and advisors to help Mao fight the Japanese. At the end of the war, with American help, the communists had become stronger and better equipped than ever before.